Hello, Samson. It's nice to meet you in person. Is that one on? Very good.
It's on. Good to meet
Okay.
you, Del.
Yeah. So we were just talking backstage a little bit, and so let's start that again and go back to where we started with your background mining, Blockstream, and how you got into Bitcoin back in, I think you said 2017 or so.
2017 was around the time I joined Blockstream. But my background is running an exchange. I was originally the COO at BTC China, and that was one of the biggest exchanges in China at the time, and mining pools too. So I think at our peak, we were about 18% of hash rate, but that was a world of difference between then and now. But we did have some of our own mining operations. And that's where I first got into, I guess, the drama side of Bitcoin, because that was the reason why Gavin Andreessen and Mike Hearn reached out, because we were one of the biggest pools. So they contacted us and said it's time to upgrade to a fork of Bitcoin, and that's where I kind of went down the rabbit hole of deeper down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. But I joined Blockstream after that, and I actually helped Adam set up the Blockstream mining division, and we were one of the first to go into Quebec and take advantage of the cheap power there. So, yeah, I do have a little bit of mining background.
Okay. And with that background in China, you were very well aware of the crackdown, and you were talking a little bit to me and telling me about how there were some miners that got hit pretty hard and they had to change some things, and then others that did not. And there's some big differences there between those two entities. Go over that.
Sure. So, I think everyone knows there's a big crackdown on mining in China. I think around that same time that I joined Blockstream, but it was always very inevitable because we knew from the exchange side that they didn't really like that operating, and that's why they closed most exchanges in China. So we spent a number of months fighting, probably like a year, against the shutdown, and we were trying very hard to comply. But I think in the end, they just decided no more Bitcoin exchanges operating on mainland China. But that kind of foreshadowed that they would go after mining eventually too, because mining is simply another way to get Bitcoin, buying with electricity instead of RMB. So yeah, when they cracked down, there was a huge impact. We could see hash rate drop massively, and most of the miners, if they could, they fled and moved overseas. A lot of them went to the US. But it's interesting, the dynamic, because the ones that suffered the most were the biggest farms, the ones that were very visible, very regulated. They're trying to get government approval and get inspections and everything. And the ones that survived were the ones that were more off grid in the mountains, running on private hydro or partnerships with local private facilities. But that was why after the big crackdown, you saw the hash rate drop. But then for some reason, there's still like 30% in China. That was the guys that were operating, quietly.
Yeah, and so you were saying there that, like, bringing this to stateside, that a similar thing with, like, as people talk about a 6102 order where it's possible, non-zero chance that the US would do some sort of seizure thing. And obviously, if you're self-sovereign, you've got your Bitcoin in self-custody, that's gonna be exceptionally hard, if not impossible in some cases. But going after certain entities could pose a risk. So you were talking about decentralized. I mean, the decentralization is kind of a big key to Bitcoining, and you were saying how the Latin American region is a large. It should be a large focus or something on miners' radars because of developed infrastructure. Are there other benefits to miners looking at the Latin America region?
Well, Latin America does have a lot of energy. I think it's still not as ripe in terms of energy as the US, but it is developing. And there's other places around the world too that are kind of hotbeds. I think a lot of the mining companies and miners are looking at them. Indonesia is one of them. They have the second highest energy potential for geothermal after the Philippines, which is number one, and that opens the door to some interesting things that can be done. But Indonesia, they're also building a nuclear plant too. So I think there is more and more energy being built out, And that is an opportunity for people that do want to get into mining or set up operations. But I think there should be a play also to move some hash rate out of the US, maybe into Latin America. It's not that far away. But centralization and large operations does carry with it some risk. Um, 6102 type operations, they're probably going to target more low hanging fruit. So Bitcoin in custodians could potentially be hit. MicroStrategy holdings could be targeted, and also large mining operations too. Like these are the easy things that the government can seize if it decides that it is imperative that they have some assets or some something.
So, when thinking about moving some of your hash rate to a Latin American region, if a company were so interested in doing that, are there some places that have an overlap? Because you've got energy is one thing. So, a place might have, say, great regulation, but not that much energy, or or the inverse of that. What are some areas that miners could look at that are whether or not the regulation is there right now, but maybe coming down the pipeline, given things that that should be looked at in terms of good energy, and this is also a welcoming place, or maybe not rolling out the red carpet welcoming, but at least accepting of Bitcoin.
Well, I think this is the whole point of decentralization. You want to mitigate regulatory aspects, political aspects, and all these types of risks that are outside of your control. Any given country might be putting forth favorable regulations on mining or Bitcoin, but that doesn't mean that things don't change in the future. I actually had an interesting conversation with a friend last night, and we're talking about the climate in the U.S. and how the pendulum might swing back the other way. It's not like the Democrats and Operation Choke Point 2.0 will never come back. It may not be next term, but the term after that, the pendulum could swing back, and you might have a unfavorable regime take hold again. So this is why you do want to mitigate all of these things by spreading out your hash rate in different regions. And of course, you need to balance that with rule of law, relative stability, and the cost of the energy. But you know smaller operations, I think, does mitigate that risk. Having a big operation gives you a lot of efficiencies, but you kind of are a bigger target at that point too. So we'll see what the future holds. But I think we do need to decentralize, and we do need things like more home mining. That will help.
So, an idea that's been talked about a few times at least today on the stage already is miners either embracing AI or the play between crypto and AI. There are some places like, for example, I was talking to a guy of New York State, historically not all that friendly to Bitcoin mining, etc., due to various reasons. But AI, oh, hey, that's our best friend. Is that a way that you could, if you wanted to do, say, primarily focus on mining, can you use AI to use it as a protective shield? Like, hey, look, we have AI here as well. Could you use that as like a moat in a sense?
Possibly, but I would say it's more likely that people just become friendly to mining, because the narratives that have been antagonistic towards mining and energy usage seem to be fading away, and common sense prevailing. And maybe that has to do with the change in the administration. Maybe it has to do with our work and education, um, you know, talking on YouTube and explaining things. Or maybe it is AI helping, because AI has kind of shown that you do need energy, right? President Trump has said before, like, we need a lot more nuclear to support all the AI compute and everything that we need. So it's kind of blown away all the obstacles in terms of public perception, or shifting that Overton window, back to normalcy. But I actually see that being a double headwind, a double tailwind for Bitcoin, because it's making it more palatable for mining, but at the same time, you're getting more energy infrastructure built out, which likely won't be needed for AI as AI becomes more efficient. Because right now we can see, like, a lot of the models are consuming way more energy than they should. And competitors like DeepSeek and others can do it at a fraction of the cost. So it's not like you need more energy constantly for AI. I think you'll see optimizations as people seek to compete. and they find better ways to train models. So what you'll end up with is a lot of excess power. And, what are you going to do with it? You can take the Germany route and demolish the plants or use them to mine Bitcoin, which seems to make more sense to me, especially if the US does start aiming to acquire for a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Yeah, it almost sounds like we're seeing a rise up in AI and building out the infrastructure for that. And then, as you said, as it gets more efficient, then it goes, okay, well, we don't need all this space, we don't need all this power. So, but we have the infrastructure here. We got the warehouse space. We got that stuff already. We can switch that out and go back to mining, maybe. So, on that, the front of mining and bringing back to the U.S., what are some things like we see all this stuff happening with states on the state level? There's that Bitcoin laws map where it's like more than half the country at this point has something pending right now, and there are anywhere from custody bills to mining to it's all over the place. But your focus is on the global adoption. Now, bringing back to mining, you were talking about Bhutan. Is that not necessarily a sign of things to come, but a a a a way that other countries should be looking at how to utilize their power, whether it be hydro or solar or what have you.
Yeah, I think so. So Bhutan has mined close to a billion, maybe a bit more, but they seem to have sold a bit of it. But I think it's the best example you can have that Bitcoin can transform a country very clearly, and it can just lift it out of poverty and monetize stranded or wasted energy. And I think the world is always in this kind of rut where they have to see someone do it. It's not enough that you tell them it can be done, but they have to see it for themselves. And Bhutan, I think, is the best example because they've done it. And now they've gone from a very poor country to the highest Bitcoin per capita country in the world. And they're going to take some of their Bitcoin earnings and build an airport. And what they're doing is stuff that I've said in podcasts and everything for years, engaging with the government in Indonesia. Indonesia, I told them the same thing. You can mine Bitcoin and like build roads, hospitals, airports, whatever you want. But it's not until someone actually goes and does it that it kind of clicks in their heads and they realize, okay, this is a thing now. So I think Bhutan will actually drive a lot of countries to actually try to start mining and tap into excess energy or untapped energy. And again, going back to geothermal, I believe there's a big opportunity for the Philippines and Indonesia to monetize their stranded energy, that geothermal potential. It's not something that they would do now, but given the example of Bhutan and the opportunity there and opportunity cost of not doing it, I think they kind of have to do it, especially with the added pressure of the executive order to, strategize on Bitcoin things and accumulate Bitcoin. So they can take what they have and find a way to tap into it. So El Salvador did announce that they would issue a Bitcoin bond, a volcano bond, to tap into their geothermal, but they haven't done that yet. And whether they will do it is still a question mark. But I think the opportunity is open right now for a lot of these other countries to actually, move ahead and do a Bitcoin security that is sort of a sovereign debt microstrategy play to finance building out mining infrastructure and energy infrastructure to start mining and getting Bitcoin.
Yeah. Now, you had right before we came up, we were talking about how the executive order. Well, I was asking you if the executive order has kind of lit a fire under other nations, because when you think of, oh, name the biggest countries in the world, Bhutan and El Salvador don't jump to my mind right away. So now that Trump has signed this executive order, are you seeing other countries either perking up and going, maybe that's something to pay attention to, or in some cases, are any of them going, oh no, we need to do something right away?
Yeah, so at Gen 3, we've been engaging with governments for the last 2 years, and we had some initial successes, and we got Madeira to announce that they're adopting Bitcoin. It's challenging for them because they're not fully autonomous. It's an autonomous region, but they still have to follow EU policy. Um, we helped Prospera with their Bitcoin strategy and their Bitcoin legal tender, but it's a special economic zone of Honduras, and they came under fire from the Honduran government. because they didn't like this zone set up by the previous administration. And after that, it was kind of challenging because we had a lot of headwinds from FTX and all the things that blew up and uh, tarnished Bitcoin's reputation. Even though it's not about Bitcoin, it's more crypto. But I think with the Trump executive order, things have sped up. We've seen a lot more interest. Some of the governments we've engaged with have stepped up their timelines. There's a city that we're talking to that they were planning to do something in 2027, and now they want to move it to 2026. But I'm telling them maybe you should go faster. But yeah, I think the answer is really it is influencing things around the world, and we know for a fact that there are more discussions heating up, and we're getting more meetings set up this year to kind of further the cause. But the time available to implement something is not much because governments move slowly, and if they do want to do some sort of policy or regulatory change, they kind of need to be working on that like today, and it might come out in 3 to 6 months if they're lucky, and if it can get passed even. So yeah, we'll see what happens. I don't think many will be able to front run the U.S. I think the U.S. is going full steam, and it's likely they'll probably be first, even though they telegraphed their intentions the first.
Yeah, it's very similar to MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy's been completely upfront. Here's what we're doing. We're still doing it. Michael Saylor posts that tracker every couple of weeks or so at this rate. So it doesn't seem to really matter if you tell everybody what you're going to do if you've already got it going on. Now, I had the gut thought, and I told you this, and you can expand on this, but I said, well, it seems like Africa is this sleeping giant. There's some clear reasons why my gut was wrong on that case. Can you expand on why Africa, even though there's a lot of energy there, there's one area where it's not as not the play that the Latin America is.
Well, Africa is very interesting, and I think Gridless is doing a lot of great work there, with the kind of smaller installations. But on a larger scale, I think it's very challenging still for Africa. Just the lack of infrastructure in general, but specifically lacking energy infrastructure. So I don't know if you remember, but the Central African Republic tried to fast follow El Salvador, and they said we're making Bitcoin legal tender too. And there was a delegation of Bitcoiners that went to visit, and what they found was like the city has power, it's spotty, but most of the country has no energy at all. So it's difficult, I think, for a mining to really take hold in Africa at a significant scale. It You can do it at smaller scales and with off-grid facilities and off-grid mechanisms, but it won't compete globally, I think, in terms of major development, simply because there's just so much infrastructure missing there. And there's a lot of political instability, a lot of corruption too. So I think in terms of mining, it'll be challenging. The adoption in Africa probably will be from, retail usage, people using Bitcoin as a means of payment, a store of value, and the like.
So in our last 5 or so minutes here, I've got a kind of a personal question in regard, not for you, but you have connections to video games. You are somewhat of a gamer. Are there opportunities there in some form or fashion for miners to either work with gaming companies, or I mean I could be completely out of my element here, but using some sort of in-game currency that could be traded for Bitcoin? Are there? It seems like there's got to be some cross-pollination that could happen there. And here's GameStop looking like they might get into the big game. Like, it seems like there's maybe some sort of Venn diagram that has not seen an overlap yet. Or am I just completely off base there?
Well, I think there's opportunities to tokenize things in games so that you can keep them in your wallet. And that solves sort of the issue where, if you did something the game company doesn't like, they can freeze your account and you lose everything. So I think a separation of the digital game assets from control of the game company is a good thing. And that's something that I'm trying to do with the game I'm building right now called Infinite Fleet. But we still haven't finished the tokenization aspect. We've just been working on the game itself. In terms of mining, I'm not really sure. I mean, you could always make the things mineable, but then it's still a centralized item. It's still you're still pointing to something in a database. So I'm not sure it would be that useful. It's sort of like an altcoin at that point. Like it's probably better just to acknowledge that these things are centralized. They can be bearer in the way that a stock can be tokenized and you can hold it, and it's there are benefits to that, like, you can't naked short sell, right? If it's a bearer asset, you can't stop trading peer to peer. You can have 24/7 marketplaces, so there are some advantages, but it's still a token representing an equity, right? It's still centralized in that manner. So I don't think there is a direct mining connection to gaming, but that's just my cursory evaluation.
Yeah, I'm waiting for there to be mining home miners sold in GameStops. You go in, you trade in some old games, and then you get some sort of desk miner. So who knows if that's coming down the pipeline. In the last few minutes that we've got here, in terms of El Salvador and the volcano bonds and whatnot that's going on there, what do you have any insight into what is happening with this IMF thing? There was that memo that came out that said you can't keep on buying Bitcoin, but then the day later we bought more Bitcoin. What do you have? What is going on there?
I don't have that much insight on El Salvador now. After the Bitcoin bonds were announced, we kind of stopped engaging because there wasn't much to do. They had implemented all the laws, and they have a bunch of people there advising them. So we kind of focused more on the rest of the world and kind of left El Salvador to develop on its own. But yeah, we don't have really any official communications on the IMF stuff other than the government has said we're going to keep stacking or adding or buying. But the IMF has said that El Salvador is complying with the agreement that they have, which it doesn't really compute. So I don't really have an answer on what's happening there, but they do look like they're buying. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it seems odd. Is Bhutan looking at any kind of bonds with what they're doing with their mining?
I mean, potentially they could tap into more hydropower and ramp up their operations, but yeah, we'll see. I think Bhutan should just keep on doing what they're doing right now and expand it, and maybe bonds and raising capital to expand it could be a way to boost it. And obviously, they already have working operational experience doing so. So, yeah, we'll see. We haven't engaged with Bhutan yet. We're planning to visit sometime maybe this year. So we'll see what happens.
I was talking to a guy from, I think he was from Argentina or Paraguay. He works in both areas, and he was telling me that Paraguay is becoming a little bit more hostile to Bitcoin mining, whereas Argentina is opening up. But since those areas are pretty close, he can do a little bit of movement, not too much, but a little bit here and there. That same idea seems like it could apply in the United States. Are there other areas in the South America region where people should be looking at aside from, say, well, I guess Argentina, but how let me rephrase this. How is Argentina on your radar in terms of adoption?
We'll see about Argentina. Obviously, Argentina is very energy rich, and Malay seems to want to open up and deregulate all those things. But he got a lot of blowback for the Libra token launch. So there are always complications, and this is why I think it's important to be Bitcoin only, because if he didn't have that kerfuffle and blow up, I think he could have gone harder on Bitcoin adoption. Because at the same time that's happening, he's still struggling with IMF and their loan with IMF too, and renegotiating terms to keep financing the debt. So it's like you already have a problem and you made the problem worse that you could have avoided by just staying Bitcoin only. And that could have opened the door to Bitcoin bonds, which would have accelerated their recovery and allowed them to finance, Bitcoin mining to make a Bhutan play in Argentina. So yeah, I mean, it's difficult with Argentina right now, but people forget very quickly. So maybe the whole thing will blow over and we'll go and visit him and we'll get him onto a Bitcoin standard.
Well, that's our time, Samson. Thank you. This has been
Okay.
enjoyable. Thank you very
So
much.